Howdy, folks. Welcome to Redneck Gone Green. I'm David Cobb. I am the redneck, and you darn tootin' I've gone green, and I'm trying to convince you to do so as well. Because remember, this whole program is dedicated not just to repeat the ain't it awful, and my goodness, it's awful, right? An ecological collapse. The late stage capitalism is literally morphing into end stage capitalism. Fascism is literally rising in this country. I mean, it is awful. But there is also seeds of hope that are sprouting. And, one of my favorite American authors is Tom Robbins. And Robbins has a great line in one of his novels where he says, he's writing in the 1970s. He says, it's hard to live in the last quarter of the 20th century because the world is falling apart too quickly to be very comfortable, but not quickly enough to be really exciting. To which Cobb says, as we enter the 21st century, things are getting very exciting because things are falling apart quickly, but because things are falling apart, opportunities are emerging that had never been seen before. Things that people have talked about, dreamed about, struggled for, but objective material conditions are opening up and giving us space to try new things. Literally, imagination space is opening up in ways that never did. So here on Redneck Gone Green, we push ourselves to tell the truth about how bad things are, but not to stay there, but instead to say, and what is to be done. It's in that spirit that I'm really excited to share with you a webinar that I'll be moderating next Tuesday, September 19th, called The Imaginal Cells of the Solidarity Economy, Politics and Policy. And in that webinar, we're going to explore how to use and influence public policy to advance specific policies that are part of a coherent strategy to completely democratize the entire economy. Worker-owned cooperatives, public banking, community land trust, participatory budgeting. And because this is literally a webinar on, again, Tuesday, September 19th, 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific, to be very clear, this whole program, if you're listening and or watching us live, this is a shameless plug and promotion for an amazing webinar that we want you to register for. It's absolutely free, but you do have to register. And in that spirit, we're going to bring Jackrabbit in, producer of Redneck Gone Green. You often will see or hear from Jackrabbit at the end of the program, but this time we're bringing him in at the very beginning to serve as co-host / interlocutor. So Jackrabbit, come on into the program. There's Jackrabbit, the handsome bastard that he is, for those of you who are watching. And if you are watching, remember, whether you're watching on YouTube or Rumble, whether you're reading this on Substack, whether you're listening it to on our podcast, please like, subscribe, and share. Our audience is growing thanks to people like you. We're breaking out of that corporate algorithm. Jackrabbit, how you doing today?
I'm doing great, David. Thanks for asking, man. I'm really excited about this webinar. I really am. So many of the topics are all ones that have been really important, I think, to me, and I'm really interested in learning more about. But that's what I would like to hear from you, David, is why, what are the topics and why are they so important?
So I'm so glad you asked that, Jack, because like each one of these are they're part of what you've heard me talk about as non-reformist reforms. And I want to be clear, every one of these topics that are going to be do a deep dive are reforms, which is to say they are winnable, they are achievable, they are concrete, and they are being won in various spaces across the country and the world, right? So every one of these can make and do make people's lives better. But if you do them all together, they can be non-reformist. In other words, they can go beyond just making one thing better, but can begin to democratize the entire system, change the rules. They can, in effect, be peaceful revolution to allow us to begin to undermine the logic of capitalism itself, the logic of white supremacy, the logic of heteropatriarchy, the logic of settler colonialism. They are ways for us to rethink how our society organizes.
So I'm gonna I just wanted to be real clear with the people who are watching or listening on our podcast. The panelists who are going to be at your webinar are going to be Kali Akuno is going to be talking about, who's there to kind of like share his experience with worker-owned cooperatives. Petula Hanley is going to be discussing participatory budgeting. Lydia Lopez will be discussing community land trusts. And we'll also have Carolyn Park, who will be talking about public banking. And these are all these topics are so important. And, one of the things I was thinking about as I was considering what our discussion today was going to be is that on their own, while they sound great, these are kind of like, in a vacuum, they're not really necessarily going to make a difference, right? They can, there's the potential for it to be there, but there's so many different factors that would be working against them as an individual success, like a public banking or community land trust, a worker-owned co-op. You mentioned non-reformist reforms, and I think that kind of working together, like all these working together as these non-reformist reforms, what does that mean and why is it important?
So thank you so much for that, Jack, because as you say, look, I want to be clear. Every one of these individual topics, worker-owned cooperatives, public banks, community land trust, participatory budgeting, they absolutely matter. They make people's lives better. They are absolute improvements on the existing system. But taken alone, they're not transformational. They are not structural. They're not transformative. So a non-reformist reform is one that is conceived not only in terms of what's possible within the framework of the given system, but instead what could be made possible that go beyond merely maintaining the status quo and fundamentally challenge the existing structure. So these are the difference between a kind of reform that just fine-tunes the status quo from the top down, but actually addresses root causes. And that's why I can go through each one of them and show you how, okay, yes, they don't challenge the overall structure, but here's the key, Jack. If there was any community doing all of these at the same time as part of an intentional, transparent plan, it would genuinely be revolutionary. It would be economic democracy. It would actually democratize finance itself.
Right. I mean, and this is something that I think is so important is like, what is going to put food on the table for people? What is going to keep people in their houses, keep them clothed? This is so important. It's such an essential element that has to be included in the work that we do as revolutionaries, right? I mean, that is essential because it's not going to be, people can't eat theory, right? Now, I mean, it's important to be able to have a strategy and a framework to be able to attack like the issues that are so important. What I really love about, what the solidarity economy discussion is about is it's about how can we kind of use our resources collectively in a way that is consistent with our principles, like the principles, like humanistic principles, right? Of cooperation and sustainability, right? And that's what this allows us to do. And so I'm hoping that like this conversation can be about those different elements, the elements that make up the larger strategy, right? And why they're important and how they work together. So back to you.
Thank you, Jack. I really want to lift up what you said and take the challenge head on. You remind me of the great African theorist and revolutionary who literally was fighting to create liberated zones in Africa, Amilcar Cabral. He said, and I quote, "Always remember that the people are not fighting for ideas, not for things that are in their head. They're fighting and accept the sacrifices that the struggle demands in order to gain material advantages, to live better, to be in peace, to benefit from progress, and for the better future for their children." And to me, and this is coming from somebody who is in armed struggle, against colonial oppressors. And he was saying, we're not doing this out of some conceptual idea. And to be clear, Jack, he was a theorist. But what he said is our theory exists in order to be better practical revolutionaries. And that, yes, there are some of us who are just inspired to do these amazing things, but the ordinary person who's first bumping up against these ideas, they want to know, is this going to make my life better? Is this going to make my child's life better? Is this going to bring me peace? Is this going to make progress something real for me? And
well,
that's why.
Yes, and right. It's like the stuff that you're talking about. I hear you and I agree. And I think that what we're talking about, the theory part of it is, this is why being in solidarity with each other and being sustainable and being considerate and compassionate and humanistic is the way that we want to structure our economy. Our economy is already structured. There's already opportunities for people to eat and to have and to be clothed and to be housed. All that stuff exists already, right? But it exists within a framework that is brutal, and it's selfish, and it inspires loneliness and mental health issues, right? And so what we're talking about is, what would it look like, right? What does it look like if we can instead get all that stuff, get the food on your table, have yourself clothed, take care of your children, get education to your family, but in a way that is based in love and not in greed and exploitation. Is that too silly? I don't think it is. Let me real quick. I'm sorry. I want to just really get this out. Human beings are mammals. All mammals work together. That is a fact. It is just an absolute fact. It's not arguable. You look at wolf packs, lions, all of them, they all work together as a group. They work together. They help each other out. Every single mammal on the planet. And we're no exception. And that's the way I feel like we need to be living our lives. And that's why I think that the theory that you're talking about is so essential, because it brings that fundamental biological evolutionary found fundament and brings it into like the reality of the basics things that we need in our lives.
So I'll just let you know, Kelly, who is a frequent viewer and listener, you got a heart and a love from her on Facebook. So thank you for that, Kelly. And Jack, you're 100% correct, right? Like, let's be clear about this. The right wing tells a lie constantly about humans being individualistic, and competition is human nature. And, that like in the Hobbesian sense, life itself is nasty, brutal, mean, and short. That's a lie. To be very clear, like, human beings, Homo sapiens, evolved because we were effective collaborators and cooperators. Like, we would not have survived at all. Certainly, we would not have been able to become the dominant species on the planet if we had not been cooperators. And I want to be clear about this, Jack. I don't believe that human beings are fundamentally angelic, nor do I believe that human beings are fundamentally demonic. I believe that most of us tend to do what we're incentivized to do. And this is the problem. Yes, our current system, the political economy, already exists, and it incentivizes exploitation, oppression, domination, and extraction. And if we created systems that incentivized cooperation, love, compassion, those things would change.
Well, let's talk about cooperation, what we want to do to those meanies.
Oh, there you go. I love this. So for those of you who are only listening on the podcast, I want to let you know what those who are watching us on Rumble or YouTube are seeing. And that is a beautiful image that says, fire your boss and take full control of your life. And what's the tagline, Jack?
It's simple, not easy.
All right. So let's get into that, right? So when we say fire your boss, that is to say worker-owned cooperatives, right? But worker-owned cooperatives, not merely for the sake of co-ops, right? So this is the thing. For those of you who don't know what a worker-owned cooperative business is, it's a business where the workers are owners. And I'm not trying to be coy. I'm not trying to be flip. I'm for real. The point is, you can have workers who are not owners, but you don't have any owners who are not workers, right? So this is an important distinction. So just because you're a worker doesn't mean you get to be an owner, but there is no owner who's not a worker in the business. So let's say me and Jack and Kelly and Catherine and somebody else Travis, who's in the conversation. We can all get together and create a new business. In the current way of thinking, there would be me, the owner, who then hire y'all. And my whole point is I put you to work to extract the surplus value of your labor, and I make money on each and every one of you. And as I bring on more employees, I do it because I'm making more money. Every employee, I only bring in an employee if it's profitable, right? A worker-owned co-op is different because it says all of the owners are also workers and get to decide how the business is operating. Now, it doesn't mean that every owner or every worker is an owner, and it doesn't mean that every decision necessarily has to go through a Occupy Wall Street style consensus process.
Thank God.
Right? But the difference is, to be clear, the difference is nobody is actually extracting the surplus value of the labor of somebody else. The point is, a worker-owned cooperative business is still a business, but it's owned by workers. And so therefore, the workers themselves are the ones who are benefiting from their labor. And when you do that, the objective data is very clear. That the folks at Democracy at Work Institute have a phenomenal amount of evidence and research where they studied these. And get this, Jack, when you fire your boss and actually take full control of your life like this, your business lasts longer than a traditional business. Worker-owned cooperative businesses last longer. Oh, but wait, there's more. Worker-owned cooperative businesses are more profitable. Worker-owned cooperative businesses have a much higher level of satisfaction for the workers. Worker-owned cooperative businesses stay in the community. And get this, every dollar spent at a worker-owned cooperative business circulates in the economy about 10 to 12 times. If you spend that same dollar for the same exact good or service in a locally owned business that's a traditional business with one owner or one or a couple of owners and the rest workers, that will circulate about 7 to 8 times. If you spend that dollar on a corporate franchise, circulates about 2.5 times. So economists call that the elasticity of money. And the point is, Jack, when you take a look at worker-owned cooperative businesses, you make people's lives better as worker owners, you empower them, they are better ways to do business. So that alone is a much better way to do it. But what we're saying is that's a necessary but not sufficient condition. We don't want to do co-ops just to do co-ops.
Yeah, and I feel like, what this really makes me think of is how important it is to have these other non-reformist reforms that we were talking about earlier that's going to be discussed in your webinar. And by the way, folks, we do have the link to the registration for that webinar, should be in the comment section. So please do check that out and register for that webinar that David will be moderating. But one of the things that this makes me think of, David, is this idea that we do need all these other things to occur as well, right? Because it's not just enough for you to have a worker-owned co-op that is, because what happens when that worker-owned co-op is somehow threatening to the capitalists who exist in that community or outside of that community, right? What are they going to do if they need to borrow money from the bank to be able to make an improvement, or for whatever reason that may come up? They're still at the mercy of the bankers and the capitalists, right? So that would like to segue into our next topic, which is public banking, if you want to kind of like get into that and why that's important as well, and how that works as a non-reformist reform.
I do, and I'm going to use a comment from Kelly, who I've already lifted up once, but Kelly is a very frequent listener and commenter. Thank you so much, Kelly, for being part of Redneck Gone Green. Kelly writes in the comments, it would be wonderful to have a world where basic needs were met without struggle and exploitation, and there was more time for every human to have agency about how to spend their time. She goes on to say, to follow their dreams or interests, to educate themselves or dig deeper into their interests. And before we get into the nuts and bolts of public banking, I really want to underscore what Kelly is saying here, which is, do human beings exist to service the economy? Or is the economy supposed to exist to facilitate us being fully human? Like, I think that Kelly's point is, yes, it would be wonderful. And Kelly, I'll go you one better. We fucking deserve that. That's how we're supposed to be living. These capitalist exploiters and oppressors have created a system where they've locked up the food. They've incentivized this level of struggle and exploitation, and they've forced us into competition with one another, right? This is not the way it's supposed to be. Like, this is not our birthright. Because I'm going to tell you something. What our ancestors, we all descend from an indigenous worldview, right? So the indigenous worldview understands that we are in a reciprocal relationship with all of life, with each other as humans, with other tribes and other groups of humans, but also with all our relations. Our cousins, the bears and the salmon, our cousins, the eagles, our second cousins, the redwood trees, right? Like, the point is, we're all related. They're all our relations. We're all dependent on each other. Life itself is a beautiful cosmic dance of interconnectivity and relationship. And what we're supposed to feel from the moment we open our eyes, what we're supposed to realize is, I am part of this magical, beautiful cosmological experience. And there is a place in the world for me. And I have not only gifts to offer, but other life has gifts to offer me. And I don't offer my own gifts merely out of some sense of, oh, I'm so wonderful, I'm giving it to others. It is literally a privilege to offer the gift, just as it's a privilege to receive the gift, right? So to me, what Kelly is talking about, that's why we got to get into public banking. And watch this segue, Jack, because public banking takes the incentive of money itself as a commodity and democratizes it, right? It understands that money is merely energy, and that the idea of money it should flow like water. There you go. Public banks for public good. You know, sometimes, Jack, when people ask me, all right, so what's the difference between a public bank and a normal bank? And the answer, you ready for this?
I'm listening.
A public bank is owned and operated to benefit the public, and all other banks are owned by private shareholders to benefit the private shareholders. And again, I'm not being coy, I'm being straight up. Public banks democratize economic decision-making because they say money and commerce itself should actually be a public good that is being put to the public interest. So, public banking is a very simple way to ask ourselves, how can we ensure that banking is not merely done for private interest? Because the way that current private banks operate is to make money for the shareholders. And that's why it can be profitable for a private bank to invest in Wall Street that's destroying small businesses. It can be profitable.
David, it's not just that it's beholden to its shareholders. It's that it's interested only in profit. That's mostly that's a fundamental motivator for these banks and for the people running.
It is the only motivator, to be clear.
Right. Whereas why is a public bank so much more essential to our plan for these non-reformers? Why is it a non-reformist reform?
Well, again, it's very simple because a public bank allows us to tap into capital without profit maximization. So, in other words, like whenever Jack talks about why are these essential, because public banks can make money available for things like affordable housing and climate mitigation. It can make things available and free us up for money in ways that a private bank would never do because those things are not profitable. It's not the concept is fundamentally different.
And I just want to say welcome to Camping Alan. It's great to have you on the show, joining us.
From Colorado. And I also want to lift up Z Manny, who is another frequent commenter and participant, who says, I saw a documentary with Gar Alperovitz. Gar wrote America Beyond Capitalism. By the way, it's a seminal book. Alperovitz says that maybe a third of the U.S. population is already tied to a worker co-op or a credit union. So Z Manny asks, how do we tap into or consolidate this huge base? People are already experiencing this. And that's the point. Z Manny, like for real, I'm not being sycophantic with you. Exactly. People are already getting a taste of it as a reform. But if you're just doing a credit union and you're not thinking about the bigger picture and trying to facilitate that, then it's still just a reform. What Jack and Kelly and myself are trying, and you, I suspect, what we're trying to do is say, yes, we do those things, but we need to do them as part of a coherent strategy to democratize the entire society.
And I'd like, and I want to point out, I read this amazing book. I highly recommend it. It's called The Color of Money by, I can't think of her name off the top of my head right now, but
Ellen Brown, I think.
No, this is different. But that's not who it is. But it's about, one of the things that this person talks about is the way that despite all the efforts that have been made in the Black community to be able to build Black banking and build up the Black community in that way, the reality of our economic system in the United States is that, the money that was supposed to be a part of the community and enrich the community, nevertheless leaked out into the broader economic system, right? And it was like there's really in the long run, there's no real way to be able to maintain and keep that money that is from the community that is being put into that Black-owned bank. There was no way really for it to multiply its value, which is what banks do. It's called the money multiplier effect. There's no way for that to happen because the system itself was extracting that wealth literally from it's historically extracted that wealth from the Black banks. And so why I think that public banking is essential as a part of the broader a broader attempt to create a revolutionary solidarity economy is because, this idea of, if the co-ops are isolated, if the public bank is isolated, then it's not as strong and it doesn't necessarily have the ability to be able to maintain itself. But it's part of the workers working, the bankers banking, putting it all together along with the rest of these non-reformist reforms that we're going to continue to talk about.
So thank you so much. And thanks also for bringing up that book, because I'll confess I had not heard of it. I just did a quick internet search and it looks fascinating.
It is.
So I am always grateful to be educated. The other thing I want to underscore is that public banks literally are incentivized to invest their money locally. So they stimulate the local economy by creating jobs and investing in local projects. It keeps local funds circulating within the community instead of the Wall Street that actually sucks money and resources out of the community for external investors. But wait, there's more, because the profit and interest that are generated through the very working of the banking structure, the profits are returned and the interest are returned to the community through lower fees for banking services, lower interest rates for loans, funding for community projects, and the very cost of operating a bank gets lowered. So fees gets lowered, interest rates get lowered, and when you have depositors like municipalities or city governments or school districts, then that frees up their money for the more existential reasons that they exist. And the other thing is to really make it clear, public banking is promoting democracy and transparency because the bank itself is fundamentally and ultimately accountable to the public, operates transparently so that the community has oversight and participation in the very decision making. So this is something that I think is really, really key.
Yeah, I agree, man. I think it sounds really great. I think it sounds really great, again, in combination with, and I keep coming back to this because I think that what we see now today in not just, well, mostly just in our country is like this, a fracturing of the left, a lack of shared goals, a lack of shared values, a lot of infighting, and a lot of organizations, single issue organizations that have their own goals that are kind of operating in isolation. And I think that to be able to discuss this and to talk about this stuff as part of a whole a whole broader strategy for the solidarity economy, I think is so essential and so important. Do you want to move on to
well, I think that the question that I see has come in from Rumble. I don't know if you want to throw that up on the screen, Jack, or if you just want me to read it out, because I think that actually gets to the very point that you just made. So I'll just let folks know that on Rumble, the question was asked, what strategies do we have to resist the financial and political interest of private banks who have nearly limitless amounts of money to squash our efforts to establish public banks? Because this gets to the point, right? If we don't cooperatively collectivize what it is that we're doing, they will pick us off one by one, right? Now, I want to be clear. Public banks, like there is a public bank in that very left-wing liberal bastion known as North Dakota. Yeah, that's a joke, right? North Dakota is, of course, one of the most conservative, rock-ribbed Republican states in the Union today. But 100 years ago, they were part of the agrarian revolution and populist uprising, and they created a public bank. And that public bank is used by ranchers, small farmers. They don't really think about it as, oh, this is some lefty idea. They think about it as, this is a better way for us to do commerce and not let the big Wall Street bullies and thugs come in and put their boots on our neck. So the way that we resist the big Wall Street banks is to make it clear and simple how much better public banks are. And we have to overcome the ruling predatory class that are actually going to be doing that, right? So public banks and worker-owned cooperatives, I hope you're seeing, Jack, and listeners and viewers of Redneck Gone Green, I hope you folks are beginning to see, oh, if these are put together, they become more powerful. So they feed each other. So instead of competing to say, no, don't work on public banks, come work on co-ops, you say, this is actually a movement of movements, that when we work on them all together, we actually all win.
Yeah, and I think it's really important that it's communicated what the benefits are, why they're important, why it matters, why so that it can grow. Like, I mean, we David, you and I were talking the other day about our experiences with Occupy Wall Street, and I think it's really important to keep in mind that there was no organized or coordinated effort when it came to Occupy Wall Street to have it happen around the country or around the world, which it did, right? And so, people saw what was happening in New York at the time and were inspired by what they saw and had those similar feelings about the reasons that people were occupying, Zuccotti Park and and they took up that banner for themselves. And I would imagine that if it's possible for these non-reformist reforms to kind of come together as a broader strategy, people will see that if it's communicated and made clear to them that it's something that they can do, and it's something that benefits them and is important for them as well. Now there's more. We only have so much time, and I know we want to just talk about all this. So I mean, all this stuff could be its own show, right? But we do want to get through some of the other stuff, and I would also love to hear something about. I've heard so much about participatory budgeting in the past, and I would love for you to share with us why it's important and how it fits into our broader strategy.
Well, I'll absolutely do that. And before I do, I would remind viewers and listeners that you're watching and or listening to Redneck Gone Green. I'm your host, David Cobb. I am the Redneck. Yes, I've gone green, and I'm trying to convince you to do it as well. And today we're talking about the imaginal cells of the solidarity economy, politics and policy, a webinar that I'm going to be moderating next Tuesday, September 19th, 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern. You do have to register. If you're listening to my voice, go to either our YouTube channel where you'll see this in the link, the registration link, or you can go to our, what is our writing called? Substack. And you can see what that's all about, right? So what I'm saying is this is something that we're going to go deeper into with folks. And now we're going to talk about the idea of participatory budgeting. And I want to lift up our good friends at the Participatory Budgeting Project, who actually breaks it down and says, in essence, participatory budgeting is a type of sourcing by ordinary people to decide how to allocate part of some kind of public budget, whether it's the city budget or a city like a school district's budget or a water district's budget, but you use a democratic, deliberative decision-making process that actually allow people to not only have influence, but actually to ensure that they help design the process, they collectively come up with potential ideas, they develop proposals together, then collectively vote on it, and that the winning projects actually get funded. In other words, Jack, think about this. It's like one of the ways that I often say, you know, when you say to somebody, I want you to exercise power by voting. And really what I'm saying is vote for somebody to make good decisions. You know what that sounds like to me? It sounds to me like somebody who says, hey, here's a book that says how to get rich. And somebody says, oh, I'll buy that book. I'd like to get rich. And then when you read the book, it actually says, okay, spend money not only on this book, but help me to get me rich and get in power, and then lobby me to do something good for you, right? It's a very indirect way at best, and it's really a scam, right? The wonderful thing about, and this is what Occupy got right, if you empower people to make decisions, and those decisions are meaningful, and they see it happen, they'll get hungry for more of it. The problem, and I say this again, you and I were part of the Occupy movement, right? We met actually during Occupy. The difference is if you have a participatory process, but you don't implement anything of meaning, then it kind of actually is it's process for the sake of process, as opposed to make people's lives better.
Can you elaborate on that? Help me to be clear about that, David.
Which part?
Well, I mean, because participatory budgeting is basically, it's like you were saying, it's a democratizing of like the resource. Basically, it's like it's allocating the resources where the public wants them to go. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Right.
And
so go ahead.
So let me actually get it super concrete, right? I'm going to tell you a bit about some 5 different participatory budgeting examples and what I would call not just their outcomes, but their successful outcome. So the participatory budgeting process usually consists of 5 basic stages. 1, designing a process. 2, you have public consultation and solicit and help ordinary people develop proposals through that process. Number 3, a process by which not elected officials are evaluating it, but the people themselves are evaluating it. Then you have some form of voting. And then lastly, there's the implementation. So this whole process actually has been done and is being done all across the world. It actually got started in Porto Alegre, Brazil, when all citizens of voting age annually since 1990, they come together and they actually vote on how to allocate the budget, the city budget, right? So it's implemented through a blend of both very direct and representative democracy so that the neighborhoods get to have thematic discussions with anybody who wants to participate can come to citywide assemblies, and the public consultations are run in several thematic blocks, like on transportation, on sports, on libraries, on health clinics, and so forth. So the result is that you get usually underrepresented groups become quite visible and they're able to articulate their needs. And what that means is that those are usually much more fairly represented in how the budget allocation gets made. So it greatly reduces corruption and it increases transparency, and the budgeting process itself becomes one of the outcomes. So in Porto Alegre, Brazil, they literally are talking about a budget of about $1,200 per person that they know if they go and participate in, they're able to help. So that's just one example. But wait, that's Brazil. I'm going to now fast forward to 2008 in Chicago. In Chicago back in 2008, and they're still doing it, by the way. But the way that process works is any resident of a particular district is welcome to first submit their ideas about what the district's infrastructure should be, right? So the city of Chicago, it's a major, huge urban center. There are multiple wards or multiple districts. So what they do is say, all right, there's a certain amount of money in every district, but what we're going to do, instead of just having the city council make the decision, a pool of money is made available to say, all right, let citizens put forward proposals, and the winning proposals are then forwarded to the relevant city agency that is responsible for implementing that. So the participatory budgeting process in Chicago back in 2008 was a hugely successful effort that showed how to implement it. And the results were just an enormously higher community participation, direct involvement in citizens, and they made different decisions in different districts. Some decided that they wanted to have more and better parks. Others went for healthcare. Others went for libraries. But the point is, when you engage the citizens, everybody then has to listen, because you can't just say, I want. You also have to say, oh, but my neighbors are making other suggestions. They're articulating other needs.
Now, so, David, I need to break in here because I mean, so one of the things that I found during Occupy Wall Street, right, was that situations that sound similar to what you're describing can actually be manipulated by actors that are not acting authentically, right? Who may have ulterior motives. This is not, I mean, it's not easy to talk about, but it's also something that I think it happens. I'll try and make a brief story about a friend of mine who was in Action AIDS in San Francisco in I forget when they were active. I don't know if it was the early aughts or if it was in the 90s. But they were these like kind of these radicals, and they had these open meetings, and as long as like you were there and you were queer, then you could just like take part in it, and it was fine. It didn't matter, right? And what they said was that the cops really hated them because they were effective. They took to the streets. They like were really, they made a difference. Cops basically sent a queer cop to the meeting, and blocked everything. That's literally what they did. And I mean, like, in just my own personal experience at Occupy Wall Street, I saw similar things happen. And so, one I mean, I really want to hear like how you like your vision of how you see these concrete things. Like these are concrete steps, participatory budgeting, right? Like public banking and cooperative workplaces. It's these sound really special and really amazing. And I'm curious because I'd like to point out that there is an underlying ideology that informs the way that they function. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the people who are going to be directly involved all share a certain ideology or a certain point of view, right? And so I feel like what I'm trying to get at is there needs to be a fundamental change in the way that we see each other that goes outside of these reforms. And I don't want to be a negative Nancy. I really don't. But I do want to point out that you can't expect everybody who comes to those meetings are going to be on your side necessarily, right?
Of course not. But that's the point, Jack. Like, again, humans are neither angelic nor demonic. Like what I'm describing and what folks in the chat are responding to so positively is that we are creating structures to incentivize cooperation, to incentivize a new way of doing things. But there's no magic wand. None of these things are going to change like people's fundamental nature. But again, I don't think that people are fundamentally ugly and mean-spirited. Like there are those people are called sociopaths, and there's no process that's going to cure a pathology, right? Sure. Like those people exist. But the problem is in our current capitalist system, we put those bastards in charge, right? Like we've rewarded them. And instead, what I'm describing in participatory budgeting and public banks and worker-owned cooperatives is to say, we're actually doing our best to disincentivize that. We know it's going to come into the process, but we don't let it control the process, which is why, like, to me, I don't believe that you don't bylaws your way into a healthy culture, right? Because culture is everything that you do and how you do it and why you do it. So if we begin to create cultures that include art, that include love, that include dancing and singing, if you start to create spaces for people to do those things, most people will begin to react accordingly. But make no mistake about it, like there are still people who are going to come in and try to get, push other people around and try to and everybody tries to in a participatory process, everybody's trying to persuade. Remember, you end up voting for this, right? So if I want a park in my neighborhood because I'm going to benefit and I think that I might become the contractor that gets a government job, like I'm trying to persuade people to do that. But other people have to be there to persuade others. But there is no magic wand that you say, if we just do this just right, all of a sudden everything is puppies and rainbows. It's still a struggle. And that's why we have conversations like this so that we can think through. But I'll tell you this, if we don't try to create new systems that incentivize love and compassion and meet people's needs, we're going to go over the cliff.
Well, definitely one of the things that struck me that you were saying was this idea of incentivizing cooperation, right? I think that's something that I really like about these different elements of a kind of a broader strategy and a broader community, a broader solidarity economy, right? Is this idea that what you're incentivizing is for people to work together. Like if I'm going to be in community with other people to be able to manage the resources that I need, that they need, right? I have to start to care about those other people. I have to care about like what they want and why they want it and what I can do to appeal to them. What is it that we have in common that we want to work together in this community to be able to make those things happen? And I think that like what I like here about what we're talking about is the more that we can have that incentive in different channels, different elements, different places in our society. So that in the workplace, in the bank, in the budgetary process, right? At the governmental level, right? If we kind of take a look at all these different places where they can be incentivized, there's a more, it grows in power, and the ideas that this is a way for us to work together become more put to the forefront. So yeah, I'm liking it, David. I think it's pretty cool.
I love what Z-Manny actually pipes in with, who says, if you're talking about moving past a particular example of something to applying that model on a larger scale or connecting people around it, that gets into the question of communication and media support. And Z-Manny, thank you so much for that, because literally that's why Jack and I and others behind the scenes are trying to create this thing called Redneck Gone Green. Like, it's not an ego trip. It is literally to say, because corporate media is never going to cover these stories, because the algorithm of like the social media is never going to lift up these kind of examples, these kinds of frameworks, we've got to do it ourselves, which is the appeal. Please comment, like, and share, whether it's the podcast, whether it is the Substack reading, whether it's YouTube or Rumble. But before we move on, because we've only got about 7 minutes left, I want to make sure that we talk about the last of the very concrete things, Jack, and that is the use of community land trusts. And, thank you for those of you who are watching on Rumble or YouTube. You get the opportunity to actually see a beautiful visual image about how a community land trust works. I'm going to do my best to walk you through it if you're listening on the podcast or otherwise just not seeing this beautiful image. So in a community land trust, a nonprofit owns the land. So by a nonprofit who does not have incentive or need to return profits to shareholders, land is no longer a commodity to be bought and paid for at a profit. So you take land itself out of the commodity market. All right, so that's good. So, but wait, there's more, because a community land trust also says, all right, if the nonprofit owns the land, but the nonprofit can get into a lease with a homeowner to own the house itself, or the box. So think about it, right? If you have a mortgage, or if you've ever purchased a home, you purchase both the land and the box, and you're borrowing money from a private bank, by the way, that's making money on the whole transaction. But in a community land trust, the land itself is owned in perpetuity by a nonprofit. So we're saying we're taking that out of the equation. But you get into a lease, what's known as a ground lease in law, to a homeowner who gets to own the box, right? The house itself. And therefore, any improvements that you make to the box are yours. Any value that comes out of the box itself. And you might even have a community land trust where you're allowed to sell the box, right? So and then typically private lenders provide the mortgage to buy that box. But now imagine you have a public bank that says, we want to ensure that there's more affordable housing. And instead of going to corporations and rich fat cats to build affordable housing, which, by the way, if I'm the fat cat, I build affordable housing, and in 30 years, it reverts back to private ownership at market rates, right? Affordable housing, the way it's currently operated, is basically a scam, right? But imagine for a moment, you say, all right, we have a community where there's a public bank, and there's a viable community land trust. So the community land trust goes to the bank, the public bank, to buy the land, and then gets with low income people to give them the opportunity to become homeowners because they're only buying the box. They're not having to buy the land. And get this, when they go and get a mortgage, they're not going to a private bank to build the house. They're actually going to the public bank that says, oh, well, we don't have to return profits to shareholders, so the interest rate is lower. We can give you more favorable terms. We can give you longer to pay off. But wait, in this community where there's already a community land trust and a public bank, there is also a worker-owned cooperative. And so that the workers who go and build these boxes are actually benefiting from their own sweat equity. And this is the point I want to make, y'all. When there are non-reformist reforms, we're literally making people's lives better. Commerce is happening, and we're not incentivizing the destruction and rapacious commodification of Mother Earth. We are actually getting into a community where everybody is getting their needs met, and none of this is having to happen in ways that we expect people to be angelic. They get to actually do what's in their best interest, but it's also in a community where the community's interests are also taken.
Yeah, and I think that's so important, David. Just like to bring it back to this idea of incentivizing and incentivizing that cooperation in all these different sectors, so that like it grows, it just multiplies. Where that's the mindset. And I do think that what Z-Manny brought up is really important too, because I think that it does, because I can speak as an American, and I feel so miserable to have to say that, but as an American, we have this idea. It's all about competition. It's all about pulling yourself up by your own bootstraps, about being the best and the brightest and the strongest, and like rising above the rest and taking what you can. It's just like there is this rugged individualism that is pushed on us from the moment that we take our first breath in America, And I think that there is going to be a challenge. I really do think that there's a challenge involved in being able to really help people to get this idea that working together and cooperating is better, is more effective, feels better, just feels better. You know what I mean? I think that is something that hopefully we'll be able to take really take a thoughtful approach towards when thinking about how to promote and grow this movement and the ideas behind this movement. I love the incentivizing of the cooperation that you're describing. I think it makes a lot of sense, and it really appeals to my need to see these ideas as something that are tangible and that can make sense to somebody who maybe isn't necessarily a theoretician and finds that to be really motivating, right? But more along the lines of what are the bread and butter issues, family that the family will discuss around the table at Thanksgiving, So yeah, I think it's great, David.
So I just want to point out, Z-Manny actually makes two comments in the chat that I want to lift up. And one is Medicare for all. Where's who's talking about this? Well, I'm going to be bringing Dr. Anna Malino into Redneck Gone Green in the next couple of weeks. And we're going to talk about that very specifically. And that the Community Land Trust is literally going to be very concretely, the California Community Land Trust Network. We're going to have next Tuesday, September 19, but not at our normal time. She's going to be on a webinar. Remember, 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern. but you do have to register for it, Z-Manny. So all of you, I know we get hundreds of views just on YouTube alone. That doesn't count the readers on Substack, which are in the thousands. It doesn't count the Rumble viewers, doesn't count the podcast. So I'm telling you, please go to this website and register for this webinar so you can ask these questions to practitioners of these policies.
Yeah, and just put the link.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to say, I just put the link in the comments so people can check it out.
The last thing that I want to do is lift up Kelly again, who is a frequent participant, who says some of the smaller communities that would be the most able to make these changes and to interconnect with them might not know about them. Redneck Gone Green could do a virtual town hall. Just a thought, she says. And I got to tell you, Kelly, thank you for that, because I'll be honest, I hadn't thought about it, but I am now. And so, yeah, let Jack and I put that into the mix. But Jack, I could really see a kind of town hall with some like local elected officials from small local communities who might want to try to think about this. So I love this idea of using Redneck Gone Green to organize, educate, advocate, right? And I'm going to conclude with this, folks. We know that there are solutions to the problems that we face. They're not being implemented because we, the people, don't control our own government. We don't control the media. We have not a democratic republic, but we actually live in an oligarchy. Or if we were really honest, a kleptocracy, right? Where the predatory class are not just ruling over us, they are stealing from us. They are stealing not only the natural resources, but they're literally stealing our future and our children's future. So to me, it's the exhortation to say it again. We know this audience is getting larger, stronger, and better organized every week. And I'm grateful for that. But if all I'm doing is making you feel better for an hour once a week, then it's really not worth it. The point is to not only inspire you, right, but to inspire you to try these experiments in your local community. Institution building is work. Now, it doesn't have to be miserable. It can be joyful, but it's still work. But that's the key. If by work we mean meaningful, productive human activity, I believe that people want to do work. If by work we mean a job where you're exploited and pushed around and bossed about, nobody wants that. So let's create systems where we get to, not have to, where we get to work together and we get to see the fruits of our labor and we get to enjoy the fruits of the labor. That's the world I want to live in, and I think you do too. Jack,
amen, brother.
All right. Good night, y'all. Peace.
Thanks, everyone.